The hollows of Harrowing in the northeastern region of the United States, nestled between sprawling forests and fog-laden hills, lies the small town of Harrowing. To an outsider, Harrowing would appear quaint and unremarkable, a place untouched by time and the chaos of modern life. But those who dwell within its borders know better, for Harrowing harbors secrets darker than the thick woods that surround it. The town was founded in the late 17th century by a band of settlers who, as legend has it, were fleeing more than just religious persecution. They were escaping a sinister past that no one dared speak of. This ominous beginning set the tone for a community that grew inward, suspicious of outsiders and fiercely protective of its mysterious history. Our story begins with Jameson Jamie Clark, a young writer from New York City seeking solitude and inspiration for his next horror novel. Jamie, captivated by the allure of Harrowing's enigmatic background, decided to rent an old cottage at the edge of town for the summer. The cottage, an aging structure with creaky floors and an air of neglect, was last occupied by Eleanor Rigby, a reclusive artist who vanished without a trace several years prior. The locals whispered that the woods had claimed her, as they had so many others. As Jamie settled into the cottage, he began to explore Harrowing, his presence met with polite nods and wary eyes. He quickly befriended the town librarian, an elderly woman named Agnes who had lived in Harrowing all her life. Agnes provided Jamie with a trove of archives and folklore that painted a picture of a town haunted by an ancient curse. According to the records, every 50 years, the town experiences a series of horrifying events that culminate in the disappearance of several townsfolk. The disappearances were always preceded by the sighting of strange, twisted figures in the woods, described in hushed tones as the Hollow Ones. These creatures were said to be the spirits of the original settlers, cursed to wander the forest for their sins. Fascinated and a bit unnerved, Jamie delved deeper, his days consumed by research and his nights by writing. But as he uncovered more about Harrowing's past, strange occurrences began to unfold. Objects in his cottage moved inexplicably, and whispers echoed through the hallways at night. Undeterred, Jamie pressed on, his curiosity morphing into obsession. One afternoon, Jamie stumbled upon an old map in the library's archives. The map detailed a forgotten section of the woods, marked with an ominous X. Agnes, upon seeing the map, turned pale and advised Jamie against pursuing it further. But Jamie's determination was unshakable. He needed to see what was hidden there, believing it held the key to understanding the curse. That night, under the cover of darkness, Jamie ventured into the woods, armed with only a flashlight and the old map. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed alive, with shadows shifting and the wind carrying whispers. Hours passed until he came upon a clearing that was not supposed to exist, at the center of which stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its branches twisted into grotesque shapes. As Jamie approached the tree, the air grew thick and cold. The ground around the tree was littered with personal belongings, watches, glasses, even old, faded photographs, as if the tree itself had consumed those who came too close. Mesmerized by the sight, Jamie failed to notice the figures emerging from the trees around him. They were pale, their eyes hollow, their movements jerky and unnatural. Terrified, Jamie tried to run, but the figures were fast, encircling him with inhuman speed. He screamed, but the forest seemed to swallow the sound. Just as the figures reached for him, everything went black. Jamie awoke the next morning in his bed, his clothes muddy and torn, with no memory of how he returned. Shaken, he tried to convince himself it was just a nightmare, but the mud on his boots and the scratches on his arms told a different story. He knew then that he had to leave Harrowing, but as he packed his belongings, a chilling thought stopped him. The cycle was about to begin again, and the town needed him to uncover the truth. That day, Jamie went to the library to confront Agnes, but she was nowhere to be found. In her place was a note, written in shaky handwriting, "Stop looking or you'll never leave Harrowing." And so, Jamie's resolve was set. He would stay, not just to write his novel, but to save Harrowing from its curse, even if it meant facing the Hollow Ones again. Little did he know, the town had other plans, and Jamie was about to discover that some secrets are better left buried. Continuing from where we left off, as dusk fell over Harrowing, the once charming town took on a sinister hue, and the weight of unseen eyes seemed to press upon Jamie. His once keen desire to peel back the layers of Harrowing's mysteries now tangled with a primal urge to flee, to escape the oppressive, eerie silence that blanketed the town as night approached. Yet, his writer's mind, always chasing the next line, the next twist, clung to the intrigue of Harrowing's curse. Despite the warning in Agnes's note, despite the chilling encounter in the woods, Jamie could not leave, not yet. He felt an inexplicable bond to the town, as if the very soil of Harrowing entwined with his fate, pulling him deeper into its shadowy embrace. He spent the following days in a frenzied state, visiting the homes of the locals, gathering their stories and tales of the past occurrences linked to the 50-year cycle. Each resident he spoke to told tales steeped in fear and resignation. Their voices were tinged with the same dread, their stories punctuated by moments where they looked over their shoulders, as if expecting to see one of the hollow ones standing in the doorway. Among the tales, one story stood out, recounted by an old man named Walter, who lived on the edge of town near the forest. Walter, a lifelong resident, was a child during the last cycle. He told Jamie of a night when a fog rolled in thicker than any he had seen before or since. That night, his younger sister, Ada, disappeared from their home. Despite a search that lasted weeks, she was never found, and Walter believed that the Hollow Ones took her to the heart of the forest. Walter's story struck a chord in Jamie. The idea of a recurring fog intrigued him, and he pressed Walter for details. Walter described it as a living entity, saying, "The fog ain't just mist, boy. It's the breath of the forest, and it takes what it wants." He warned Jamie that the signs were aligning for another such event, and if Jamie was wise, he would not be in Harrowing when it arrived. Fueled by Walter's warnings, Jamie began to see patterns that he hadn't noticed before. The cycles didn't just involve disappearances but were preceded by smaller, more subtle disturbances, pets gone missing, strange marks on trees, and an increase in the sighting of wildlife fleeing the woods. These discoveries compelled Jamie to revisit the forest, to face whatever horrors awaited, but this time with more preparation. He gathered supplies, a camera to document his findings, salt as per an old superstition Walter mentioned could ward off evil spirits, and a sturdy flashlight. As he approached the same clearing, the air turned cold, and a light mist began to form, swirling around his feet. The ancient tree stood as before, stark against the darkening sky. Jamie felt a vibration in the air, a hum of energy that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. He placed his camera on a tripod, pointing it at the tree, and sprinkled a circle of salt around himself, a meager protection, but it gave him a semblance of security. As night deepened, so did the mist. It grew in density, becoming a fog that soon enveloped the entire clearing. Jamie's heart raced as he peered into his camera's viewfinder, watching as shapes began to materialize in the fog. They were human in form but moved with an eerie fluidity, as if they were part of the mist itself. Jamie documented everything, his camera capturing the forms as they drew nearer. The air grew oppressively still, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the trees, though Jamie could see no source for it. The voice spoke a warning, an ancient phrase repeated thrice, "Leave or be lost." Panic clawed at Jamie's resolve. He stepped back, faltering, his foot crossing the salt line. At that moment, the figures surged forward, their forms becoming more distinct, more terrifying. They were indeed the Hollow Ones, their eyes empty voids of despair, their mouths agape in silent screams. Jamie ran, the fog swirling chaotically, disorienting him as he tried to find his way back to the cottage. Branches clawed at his clothes, tripping him, as if the forest itself was determined to keep him there. He could hear the Hollow Ones behind him, their whispers like leaves rustling violently in a storm. He barely made it back to the cottage, slamming the door shut and collapsing against it, panting and drenched in sweat. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, and through it, Jamie could see the faint outlines of the hollow ones, watching, waiting. The night passed with Jamie trapped inside, the fog enveloping the cottage until dawn when it finally receded back into the woods. Exhausted but alive, Jamie knew he had to make a decision. Despite the terror of the night, his drive to uncover the truth, to understand the nature of the hollow ones and Harrowing's dark heart, only intensified. He couldn't leave, not when he was so close, not when the cycle was about to climax. He decided he would stay until the end of the summer, until he had answers, or until the town took him too. The next day, under the heavy gaze of an overcast sky, Jamie ventured into town to gather more supplies and research. The townspeople seemed more withdrawn than usual, their eyes darting nervously as they hurried about their business. The local grocery store, usually a hub of chatter, was subdued, the conversations whispered, fleeting. Jamie sensed their fear, a tangible dread that something terrible was imminent. In the afternoon, he returned to the library to find it deserted, save for a note on the door stating it was closed due to an emergency town meeting. Curious and anxious to understand more, Jamie made his way to the town hall, a decrepit building at the center of Harrowing, its walls as old as the secrets it housed. Inside, the hall was packed with residents, their faces etched with worry. At the front, the mayor, a stern woman with sharp features, was speaking in hushed tones about the need for preparations and precautions. As Jamie entered, a hush fell over the crowd, their suspicion of the outsider palpable. He found a spot at the back, leaning against a wall, straining to catch the words that fluttered with urgency from the mayor. "We all know why we're here," the mayor was saying. "The signs have been clear this year, clearer than any of us have ever seen. The fog last night was just the beginning. We need to be ready." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd, along with an undercurrent of fear. One by one, people stood to share their encounters with the strange occurrences around town, the disappearance of pets, the strange markings on trees, the sightings of shadowy figures near the woods. With each account, Jamie's notes grew, each story a piece of the puzzle he was desperately trying to solve. After the meeting, Jamie approached the mayor, introducing himself and his purpose in Harrowing. The mayor, Mrs. Langley, regarded him with a mixture of skepticism and resignation. "You're playing with fire, Mr. Clark," she warned. "This town isn't just another story for you to exploit. These are real lives, real dangers." Jamie assured her of his respect and intentions, asking for any information that could help him understand. Reluctantly, Mrs. Langley agreed to speak with him privately. They met in her office, where she pulled out an old, dusty book from a locked drawer. It was a journal dating back over a century, containing entries from various mayors of Harrowing, each chronicling the events of the cycles. As Jamie flipped through the pages, he found a pattern in the entries. Every 50 years, the events escalated, starting with small disturbances and culminating in a night of horrific events, the Night of the Reckoning, as it was called. This was the night when the barrier between Harrowing and the otherworldly forces at its border thinned to a near-transparent veil, allowing the hollow ones to claim what they believed was theirs. "This year," Mrs. Langley said, pointing to the calendar, "is the 50th year. And from what we've seen, this reckoning will be like no other. The signs have been too strong, too clear." Armed with this new knowledge, Jamie felt both a sense of dread and a burning need to witness the reckoning, to document it, to perhaps find a way to help the town. He thanked Mrs. Langley, who only shook her head sadly, as if mourning a decision already made, a fate already sealed. That night, as Jamie lay in bed, the wind began to howl outside, a mournful, eerie sound that seemed to whisper secrets in a language just beyond understanding. The air grew chill, and the fog began to roll in again, thicker, more oppressive than before. Jamie knew this was the beginning, the prelude to the reckoning. He set up his equipment, checking his cameras, his notes, his supplies. He knew that whatever happened tonight, he had to be prepared to face it, to record it, to survive it. Outside, the fog swallowed the town, the streets, the lights, enveloping everything in its dense, moist embrace. And then, the whispers started, soft at first, then growing clearer, more insistent. They called to Jamie, beckoning him to step into the fog, into the heart of Harrowing's curse. As Jamie stood at the threshold of his cottage, the chilling embrace of the fog seeped through the cracks of the door, whispering his name. The voices were not just echoes now, they were clear, compelling, luring him into the depths of the night. With every fiber of his being screaming against the decision, Jamie stepped out into the fog, his camera slung over his shoulder, his flashlight piercing the dense white mist ahead. The streets of Harrowing, once familiar during the day, had transformed into an alien landscape. The fog muffled all sounds, making his footsteps sound hollow on the old cobblestone paths. The street lamps were dim orbs of light, floating in the sea of mist, barely illuminating the path forward. Jamie's heart pounded in his chest as he moved towards the center of town, towards the ancient tree that seemed to be the heart of the town's curse. As he walked, the whispers grew louder, more desperate. They were not just calling him now, they were pleading, warning, threatening. Jamie pressed on, the cold air biting at his skin, his breath visible in the air. The town was eerily silent, devoid of life, as if even the stray animals had decided to hide from whatever was coming. When Jamie reached the town square, he found the ancient tree at its center waiting for him, its gnarled branches swaying gently in the wind. The ground around it was scattered with more objects than before, old toys, books, spectacles, each item a relic of someone who had vanished. The air around the tree was colder, and Jamie could feel the pull of it, an almost magnetic draw. Setting up his camera, Jamie prepared to document whatever was to occur. He didn't have to wait long. The air grew colder still, and a low hum began to resonate around the square, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The fog began to swirl violently, centering around the ancient tree, and Jamie's flashlight flickered erratically. From the fog, the figures emerged, more numerous than before. The hollow ones. Their forms were clearer now, their faces etched with pain and sorrow, their eyes empty pools of despair. They moved towards Jamie, slowly, deliberately, as if each step was measured and heavy with purpose. Jamie's mind raced with fear, but he stood his ground, filming, watching as the hollow ones stopped just at the edge of the light cast by his flashlight. They spoke in unison, a voice that was both ancient and heartbreaking. The time has come. The cycle must complete. Will you join us, or will you end us? Jamie, overwhelmed by the presence of the spectral figures, realized what they were asking. Harrowing's curse was not just a series of hauntings, it was a cycle of sacrifice, of renewal. Every 50 years, the town offered souls to the forest, to the ancient forces it harbored, to maintain a fragile peace. With trembling hands, Jamie made a decision. He spoke into his camera, his voice steady despite the terror gripping him. I am here to document, to understand, not to join or to end. But perhaps there is another way. Turning to the hollow ones, Jamie continued, what if the cycle can be broken? What if Harrowing can be freed? The hollow ones paused, their whispers quieting. After a moment that felt like an eternity, they responded, then show us the way, outsider. Show us the light or be consumed by the darkness. With the challenge set, Jamie's mind raced. He thought of all the lore he had read, the superstitions and the stories. He quickly formed a plan, based on a blend of old town lore and his own intuition. He directed the light from his flashlight, not at the hollow ones, but at the ancient tree, illuminating its twisted form. Then, taking a risk, Jamie stepped forward, breaking the circle of his own safety, and placed his hands upon the bark of the ancient tree. He recited words from Agnes's library, words meant for sealing and unbinding, words of old magic forgotten by most but preserved in the dusty tomes of Harrowing's library. The ground trembled, the air shimmered, and the hollow ones shrieked, their forms wavering as if caught in a storm. The tree's branches writhed, and from its base, a light began to emerge, growing brighter, enveloping everything. Jamie felt the energy surge through him, a connection forming between him, the tree, and the hollow ones. The light grew blinding, and as Jamie's eyes closed against the brightness, he heard one final whisper, "Thank you." When the light dimmed and Jamie opened his eyes, the town square was empty. The fog had lifted, and the early morning light painted the streets with hues of orange and pink. The tree was gone, leaving behind only a small sapling in its place. In the sleepy town of Eldridge, nestled against the shadowy sprawl of Blackwood Forest, the old Whitley house stood as a chilling reminder of its grim history. Known locally as the Nightmare Nest, the house was a hotspot for daredevils and ghost hunters, but few dared to trespass after sunset. The story of the Whitley house begins with the unexplained disappearance of the entire Whitley family one stormy night in 1954, a mystery that remained unsolved, leaving a permanent dark cloud over the property. Mia, a young and ambitious documentary filmmaker, became obsessed with the legend after stumbling upon an old newspaper clipping. The idea of crafting a film around the house's eerie past and its supposed hauntings seemed like the perfect project to launch her career. Driven by curiosity and the allure of capturing real paranormal activity on camera, Mia gathered a team of 4: Alex, her best friend and sound technician; Derek, a skeptical cinematographer; Lisa, a medium known for her sensitivity to the supernatural; and James, a local historian familiar with Eldridge's darkest corners. The team arrived at Eldridge on a cold, foggy evening. The town itself seemed to whisper secrets, with its ancient, gnarled trees and the ever-present mist that clung to the ground. As they drove through the deserted streets, the locals watched from shadowed doorways, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and warning. Upon reaching the Whitley house, the group was struck by its ominous presence. The house loomed at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, its windows dark and gaping like the eyes of a skull. The once grand exterior was now marred by decay, the siding peeling and the porch steps sagging dangerously. Despite its dilapidation, the structure exuded an inexplicable magnetism, pulling them towards its dark interior. Mia and her team set up their base in the main living room, where a chandelier hung crookedly from the ceiling, its crystals long since stolen or shattered. The air inside was musty, filled with the scent of mold and decay. As they unpacked their equipment, Mia explained their plan to spend 3 nights in the house, using various types of recording equipment and spiritual mediums to uncover the truth behind the hauntings. The first night was relatively uneventful, with the team experiencing little more than a few unexplained noises and the occasional cold draft. Derek remained skeptical, attributing the phenomena to the house's age and structural issues. However, as the second night unfolded, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Around midnight, while reviewing footage, Alex pointed out a shadowy figure that seemed to flit across the corridor leading to the basement. The figure was barely visible, but its movement was unnaturally swift and jerky. Intrigued and unnerved, the team decided to focus their efforts on the basement, the site where the Whitley family's personal items had been found undisturbed for decades. Descending the creaky steps into the basement, the air grew significantly colder. Lisa, the medium, began to tremble, whispering that she felt a strong, malevolent presence. She described seeing a man, his expression twisted in rage, his hands covered in what looked like blood. This spectral figure, she claimed, was the patriarch of the Whitley family, and he was not alone. As Lisa communicated with the spirit, the temperature dropped further, their breath visible in the icy air. Suddenly, all the lights flickered out, plunging them into darkness. The team scrambled for their flashlights, their beams cutting through the blackness like knives. In the chaos, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the basement, sending them rushing toward the sound. There, in the dim light of their flashlights, lay a pile of old, yellowed papers that had fallen from a hidden shelf. Among these papers was a diary belonging to Mrs. Whitley, its pages filled with frantic, scribbled entries that spoke of paranoia, a haunting, and a fear so palpable it seemed to leap from the pages. The last entry was dated the night of their disappearance, ending abruptly with the words, "He has found us." Engrossed in the diary, the teen did not notice the subtle changes occurring around them. The air thickened, and a low hum began to resonate through the walls of the house. It was as if the house itself was coming alive, responding to the presence of its past occupants. As Mia read aloud from the diary, a sudden, horrifying shriek filled the basement. It was a sound of pure terror and agony, cutting short as it had begun. Startled, the teen turned to see Lisa, her eyes wide with fear, pointing toward the shadows. There, just beyond the reach of their lights, the outline of a figure could be seen, its features obscured but its intent unmistakably sinister. The teen stood frozen, the weight of the house pressing down on them. As they watched, the figure seemed to flicker, like a faulty old film, between the forms of a man and something far more grotesque, something that defied the natural laws of shape and form. It was as though the shadows themselves were alive, twisting and writhing in the dim light of their flashlights. Derek, despite his skepticism, filmed the figure, his camera's night vision turning the shadow into a ghastly, green-tinged specter. The figure began to move towards them, slow and deliberate, as if savoring their fear. Mia, though terrified, continued to read from Mrs. Whitley's diary, her voice trembling. Each word seemed to draw the figure closer, and with every step it took, the temperature dropped further, their breaths becoming visible puffs of white in the freezing air. "Please, we mean you no harm," Mia called out, her voice echoing off the cold stone walls. "We just want to understand what happened here." The figure stopped, and for a moment, the only sounds were the soft whimpers from Lisa and the steady drip of water from a crack in the ceiling. Then, as if compelled by Mia's words, the figure's form stabilized, revealing a man in his mid-40s, wearing what appeared to be the tattered remains of a dinner suit. His eyes were hollow, the pain of his eternal torment clear in his gaze. "I am Harold Whitley," the figure spoke, his voice a hollow echo of what it once might have been. "This is my house, and you are not welcome here." James, the historian, stepped forward, his curiosity overcoming his fear. "Mr. Whitley, we've read your wife's diary. We know something terrible happened here. Please, tell us your story so we can help." The specter of Harold Whitley seemed to consider this for a long moment before he began to recount the tale of his family's doom. He spoke of a hidden room in the house, a cursed place where he had discovered ancient artifacts buried beneath the floorboards, artifacts tied to dark rituals and even darker entities. Harold confessed that his obsession with these artifacts had brought a malevolent presence into their home, one that not only haunted them but eventually led to their mysterious disappearance. As Harold narrated, the air around them grew denser, the shadows darker, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to thrum with an unseen force. Compelled by the story and determined to discover the truth, Mia asked, "Where is this room? Show us, so we can help set you free." With a mournful glance, Harold pointed towards a section of the basement wall that looked no different from the rest. "Behind there," he said, "but beware, for its secrets are not meant for the living." Driven by a need to uncover the truth and perhaps put an end to the hauntings, the team decided to break through the wall. Using tools from their van, they chipped away at the bricks, each strike sending a shiver through the house, as if it were protesting their intrusion. After several tense minutes, they broke through, revealing a small, hidden room, dust-choked and filled with strange, ominous symbols scrawled across the walls. Inside the room, amidst a collection of arcane objects, lay a large, ancient book bound in what appeared to be human skin. Its pages were filled with indecipherable script and disturbing, detailed illustrations that twisted the viewer's stomach. Derek, ever the skeptic, reached out to film the book closely, but as his fingers brushed against its cover, a sudden, violent force threw him back against the wall, knocking him unconscious. Panic ensued as the teen rushed to Derek's aid, finding him pale and barely breathing. As they tended to him, the air grew thick with the scent of sulfur, and the ground beneath them began to quake. The walls of the hidden room started to crumble, revealing even darker recesses behind them, as if the house itself were opening up to swallow them whole. In the chaos, Mia managed to grab the ancient book, believing it held the key to ending the curse. As she clutched it to her chest, the spectral figure of Harold Whitley faded into the shadows, his final words echoing in the rumbling air, "Beware the heart of darkness within." With Derek incapacitated and the house seemingly coming alive around them, the team realized they had to escape before it was too late. Carrying Derek between them, they stumbled through the collapsing basement, dodging falling debris and the ever-encroaching darkness. The house moaned and groaned like a dying beast as they made their way back upstairs, the floorboards buckling and the walls bending inwards, as if trying to trap them inside. As they reached the ground floor, the front door appeared impossibly far, the hallway stretched out by some trick of the malevolent force that seemed to warp the very fabric of the Whitley house. The portraits on the walls, once mere faded memories of a bygone era, now looked alive, their eyes following the team's frantic movements, expressions twisted in grotesque smirks and frowns. The air was thick, heavy with dread and the scent of rot that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. As they half-carried, half-dragged Derek towards the door, the house's hostility intensified. The chandelier above swung wildly as if caught in a storm, casting eerie, dancing shadows that seemed to reach out towards them with claw-like fingers. Each step was a battle against an unseen force that pushed back against them, as if the very air was trying to force them deeper into the house's dark heart. Lisa, gripping the ancient book Mia had seized, began to chant in a voice that was not entirely her own. The words were strange, guttural sounds that seemed to resonate with the house, causing the oppressive atmosphere to momentarily falter. This gave them just enough reprieve to reach the front door. However, as Alex reached out to throw it open, the door slammed shut with an inhuman force, the sound echoing through the house like thunder. The team recoiled as the temperature dropped sharply, their breath visible in the air, forming clouds that seemed to be sucked towards the ceiling, coalescing into a thick, dark mass. From this mass, a deep, menacing laugh resonated, bouncing off the walls and filling the space with malice. "We cannot leave," Lisa said, her voice trembling as she clung to the book. "Not until we break its hold." Mia, determined and fierce despite the terror clawing at her mind, nodded. "Then we find its heart. We end this now." Turning to James, she asked, "Where would it be?" "The heart of the house?" James, pale and shaken, thought for a moment before replying, "The attic." "It must be." In old homes like this, the attic often held what was most precious, or most feared. With no other choice, they made their way to the staircase, the house seeming to groan in protest with each step they took. As they ascended, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides. The light from their flashlights flickered, as if struggling against the darkness that wanted to consume everything. Reaching the attic door, they found it covered in old, rusty chains, padlocked with no key in sight. Derek, regaining some of his strength, pulled a heavy iron candle holder from the wall and began to smash at the padlock. After several tense, frantic moments, the lock gave way with a loud snap, and the chains fell to the floor with a clatter that sounded like chains in a dungeon. They pushed the door open, and the attic revealed itself to be a room out of time. Dust motes floated in the beams of their flashlights, dancing like tiny spirits in the air. The room was filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, giving the appearance of ghosts lurking in the shadows. But it was the far end of the attic that drew their eyes, where a large, ornate mirror stood covered by a black velvet cloth. Approaching the mirror, Mia felt a pull, an almost magnetic draw. As she reached out to pull away the cloth, the house trembled violently, a roar filling the air as if it were the cry of the beast itself. The cloth fell away, and the mirror's surface rippled like water, images flashing across it too fast to catch. "The heart," Mia whispered, staring into the depths of the mirror. "It's showing us." The images slowed, revealing scenes of the house's past, the Whitley family in happier times, then twisted into scenes of horror, rituals performed in the basement, dark figures dancing in the shadows, and then the night the family disappeared, shown in harrowing detail. As they watched, transfixed, the mirror's surface began to swirl again, and a figure started to emerge from it, the form of Harold Whitley, but twisted, his features malign and terrifying. He stepped out of the mirror, the air around him crackling with dark energy. "You seek to unbind what you do not understand," the apparition of Harold growled, his voice like the grinding of stones. "This house is not just a building, it is a vessel, and I am its keeper. You will not destroy what I have protected for so long." With Harold's declaration, the air turned icy, and the team felt the oppressive power of the house surge once more. They were in the heart of its darkness, confronting the spirit that had haunted the Whitley house for decades. As they prepared to face Harold, the spirit keeper, their resolve was tested to its limits, knowing that the struggle to free themselves and the house from its curse was about to reach a critical, terrifying climax. Mia, holding the ancient book close, found her resolve strengthening as she faced Harold. The book seemed to pulse with a power of its own, its pages fluttering as if caught in a wind that didn't affect the rest of the attic. She opened it, and the strange, arcane symbols on the pages glowed faintly in the dim light. Lisa, still channeling the energies around her, began to chant, using the words inscribed in the book. Harold's form flickered, wavered like a flame in a draft. The house responded with a low, menacing rumble, the floorboards shaking under their feet. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling as the house's very structure seemed to protest against their actions. "We have to break the mirror," James shouted over the cacophony, pointing to the ornate mirror from which Harold had emerged. "It's the source of his power, the portal between his world and ours." Without hesitation, Derek picked up the heavy iron candle holder that had broken the padlock earlier and swung it with all his might at the mirror. The first strike caused a sharp, ear-piercing screech as the surface cracked, a web of fractures spreading across the glass. Harold screamed, a sound so filled with pain and rage that it chilled them to their bones. "Keep going!" Mia yelled, her voice nearly lost in the tumult. Derek swung again and again, each hit weakening Harold further as the mirror's structure began to crumble. The apparition of Harold thrashed, trying to reach Derek, but Lisa's chants held him back, creating a barrier he couldn't cross. With a final, resounding crash, the mirror shattered, pieces of glass raining down around them. Harold's scream reached a deafening crescendo before cutting off abruptly as his form disintegrated into nothingness, swept away like dust in the wind. The house gave one last shudder and then stilled, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a dark cloud clearing after a storm. The air felt lighter, and for the first time since they had entered, they could breathe easily. The remnants of the mirror lay scattered on the floor, harmless shards of glass reflecting only the attic's dim light. The team stood in silence, processing the night's harrowing events. Mia closed the ancient book with a soft thud, its glow fading along with the malevolent presence that had pervaded the Whitley house. "We did it," Alex said, his voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We actually did it." Lisa, exhausted from the ordeal, nodded slowly. "Yes, but we must ensure that nothing like this happens again. We need to seal this place, and this book, for good." Mia agreed. "We'll document everything first. Then we'll make sure no one can misuse the power of this house or the secrets in this book." As dawn broke, casting light into the attic, the team packed up their equipment, each movement heavy with the fatigue of their ordeal but buoyed by their success. They left the Whitley house with a sense of closure, the morning sun dispelling the last of the shadows that had clung to the old structure. However, as they reached their van parked at the edge of the property, Mia took one last look back at the house. A chill ran down her spine as she noticed something unsettling. From one of the upper windows, a faint, almost imperceptible glow seemed to flicker. She squinted, trying to discern if it was just a trick of the light or something else, something they might have missed. The house, though quiet now, still held its secrets, some perhaps deeper and darker than they had imagined. As they drove away, the Whitley house stood silent against the horizon, its story far from over.